something is breaking inside the Indiana Fever organization. And no, it's not Sophie Cunningham's elbow. It's the trust. The trust between a franchise sitting on top of the most passionate fan base women's basketball has ever seen, and the millions of people who made that possible in the first place. In the last week alone, we've had a mysterious injury that appeared out of thin air, two players telling completely different stories about the same play on two different platforms, a sideline confrontation between the head coach and the biggest name in the sport, and a front office that keeps choosing narrative management over simple transparency. All of that, while Clark and Aliyah Boston quietly wrote themselves into the WNBA record books. This is the full story, every thread, every layer, every unanswered question. Let's get into it. Sophie Cunningham was ruled out for Indiana's Commissioner's Cup matchup against the Chicago Sky on Thursday night, and the moment that injury report dropped, the basketball internet went into full meltdown mode. Right elbow, that was the listed reason. Her first missed game of the entire 2026 season. Up until that point, Cunningham had been one of the most dependable pieces in a Fever rotation that has otherwise been anything but stable. She played in all 11 games. She averaged nearly 9 points a game in just under 23 minutes of action. She had her best night of the young season against the Seattle Storm when she went off for 17 points and looked every bit the player this fan base has come to love. And then she vanished from the lineup less than 24 hours before tip-off against a struggling Chicago team, with zero warning and zero build-up. That is the part that set people off. Nobody saw a single sign. There was no moment in a previous game where she grabbed her arm and winced. There was no mention of soreness in any post-game media availability. No subtle note on a prior injury report. One day she was healthy and in the starting caliber rotation, and the next morning she showed up listed as questionable with a right elbow issue that apparently nobody outside the Fever training room had any clue about. It felt like it came out of nowhere because, from the public's perspective, it literally did. Then Stephanie White sat down for her pregame press conference and made the whole thing worse. She mentioned, almost casually, that the elbow had actually been bothering Cunningham for a while. That the training staff had been working on it. That they had been doing treatment and trying to get her ready to play, but were thinking about the bigger picture. And that one sentence changed the entire conversation. Because if the elbow had been sore for a while, and if treatment had already been underway, then this was not some sudden acute thing that happened in Wednesday's practice. This was an ongoing issue being managed behind closed doors. The public only found out about it when Sophie's name appeared on the injury report the morning before the game. Now, to be absolutely clear here, nobody is saying the injury is fabricated. Nobody credible is claiming Sophie Cunningham is perfectly healthy and sitting out for some hidden reason that has nothing to do with her arm. But here is what any honest person watching this franchise would tell you. The suspicion, the side eye, the flood of conspiracy theories that hit social media within minutes of that report dropping, the Fever built all of that themselves. Every single brick of it. When you operate in silence and only offer explanations after the fact, you hand people the space to fill in the blanks with their own theories. And this fan base has been handed that space over and over and over again. There is context here that makes the timing even heavier. This is Cunningham's first appearance on the injury report since she tore her MCL during a game against the Connecticut Sun last season, an injury that ended her year. Fans watched her fight back from that. They watched her grind through rehab and return this season ready to compete from Game 1. So when her name shows up on the injury report again with almost no explanation, the emotional weight is enormous. The good news is she has since been upgraded to probable for the upcoming game against the Sun, which suggests this is a manageable issue. But the damage to the communication trust was already done the moment White revealed this had been an ongoing situation nobody was told about. And the elbow was only half the story. Because what happened a few days earlier might reveal even more about what is going on inside that building. Rewind to the final seconds of the Fever's game against the Washington Mystics. Indiana is down by 1. The clock is under 5 seconds. The ball is out of bounds and in Sophie Cunningham's hands. The arena is holding its breath. Cunningham surveys the floor, spots Clark drifting to the weak side, and fires a cross-court laser. Clark catches it in stride, steps back behind the arc, and buries a deep three-pointer with just over a second remaining. Game over. Fever win. The building erupts. Social media goes nuclear. For about 12 straight hours, everything in Fever Nation was perfect. Cunningham was a hero. Clark was iconic. The play was beautiful. The win was emotional. Nobody wanted to poke at it. Then Sophie Cunningham went on Instagram and posted something that lit the entire thing on fire. She shared a graphic about the final play that many fans interpreted as her suggesting the sequence had not gone according to plan. The inbound pass to Clark was not the designed play that Stephanie White drew up. That she had gone rogue, read the floor in real time, and made the decision on her own. The implication, whether she intended it or not, was that the game-winning moment was born from improvisation, not coaching. The internet predictably lost its mind. Cunningham then came back and commented on the post in plain text, writing that people were reading too much into it and that the play was the exact one their coach drew up. They executed it perfectly. Case closed, right? Not even close. Because a couple of days later, Lexi Hull sat down for a radio interview and told a completely different version of events. Hull said she could not say the final play was exactly what they drew up, that they were actually trying to draw a foul, and that Clark simply made a great basketball read in real time. Hull's version lined up perfectly with what fans had originally believed after seeing Cunningham's Instagram post. The play broke down, Clark improvised. Sophie delivered the pass on instinct, and the result was a win. Here is the problem. You now have two Indiana Fever players going on two separate platforms and giving two contradictory accounts of the same final play. Cunningham says it was the designed play, executed to perfection. Hull says it was not what they drew up, but it worked. Both of them cannot be telling the same truth at the same time. One of those stories is spin. And when you are a franchise that already has a credibility gap the size of the Grand Canyon, having your own players publicly contradict each other on something this visible is not a minor detail. It is gasoline on a fire that did not need to exist in the first place. What was almost certainly a beautiful, instinctive basketball moment got turned into a narrative management exercise that made the coaching staff look insecure, and the organization look like it cannot get its story straight on a play that literally won them the game. Why does a winning play need to be retroactively credited to the coach's design when the evidence suggests otherwise? What exactly is being protected here? And this was not even the first time Stephanie White's relationship with her franchise player raised eyebrows this season. The Fever's game against the Portland Fire on May 31st was supposed to be routine. Indiana came out strong, built a lead, and looked like they were in full control of the game. Then Stephanie White made a decision that changed the entire energy of the night. She pulled Clark, Aliyah Boston, and Lexi Hull from the game while the Fever were still ahead. Portland immediately went on a run and took the lead, closing the first quarter up 29-15. The momentum was gone, the crowd could feel it, and then came the moment that turned a bad coaching sequence into a full-blown controversy. During a timeout, cameras caught White and Clark in what can only be described as an intense exchange on the sideline. It was not a casual coaching conversation. The body language was sharp. The tension was visible. And to make matters worse, White then asked rookie guard Raven Johnson to step in and take Clark's spot in the huddle. Whether that was a strategic decision or a reaction to the confrontation, the optics were brutal. You do not bench your franchise player and then visibly replace her in the huddle without expecting the entire basketball world to notice. Neither White nor Clark addressed the specifics of the interaction in their post-game availability. Clark later described it diplomatically, calling it two competitive people being competitive. But the damage was already spreading. Within hours, Skip Bayless went on air and claimed Stephanie White had been fired by the Fever. That report turned out to be completely false, based on fabricated social media posts that went viral before anyone could verify them. But the fact that a fake firing report gained that much traction tells you everything you need to know about the current state of public confidence in this coaching situation. People believed it because it felt plausible. That is not a good place for any organization to be. Jason Whitlock added more fuel on his podcast, stating plainly that he believed there was a real divide forming in the Fever locker room, with people choosing sides between Clark and Stephanie White. Now, locker room dynamics are always more complicated than outside voices make them seem, and it is important to frame that kind of commentary as speculation rather than confirmed fact. But the pattern is hard to ignore. The sideline clash in Portland, the post-game moment after the Mystics' loss where White was asked about Clark's late-game heroics, and chose to redirect the conversation toward the team rather than acknowledge her star player directly. The officiating comments that landed her in trouble with the league after Clark suffered a quad injury. Each incident on its own might be explainable. Stacked together, they form a picture that fans and media are finding increasingly difficult to ignore. And the roots of this tension trace back further than most people realize. Back to a press conference podium in Connecticut that Stephanie White probably wishes the internet would forget. September 2024. Stephanie White was still the head coach of the Connecticut Sun. She stood at a podium during the WNBA playoffs and delivered a message that resonated across the entire sports world. Her players, specifically Alyssa Thomas, had been on the receiving end of vile, racist, deeply personal attacks from a segment of the Indiana Fever fan base during their playoff series. The abuse was real. It was documented. It was disgusting. And White's condemnation of that behavior was completely appropriate and absolutely necessary. Nobody with any decency would argue otherwise. But what White did in that moment went beyond condemning racist trolls. She framed the entire issue as a media problem. She said the media needed to stop letting social media shape the narrative. She said platforms and journalists had a responsibility to resist amplifying bad actors. And while that sounds reasonable on the surface, the framing she chose did not draw a clear line between targeted racial harassment and legitimate critical sports coverage. She treated them as part of the same ecosystem of toxicity, and that created something dangerous. It created a rhetorical shield that could be used to deflect virtually any criticism of a franchise or a coaching staff under the broad umbrella of trolls driving the conversation. Fast forward 2 months, and Stephanie White accepted the Indiana Fever head coaching job. The single most scrutinized, most analyzed, most watched coaching position in the entire history of women's professional basketball. She knew what she was walking into. Everyone told her. It was written about extensively. The spotlight was not a surprise. And yet, based on everything that has played out since she arrived in Indianapolis, her approach to that spotlight appears to be rooted in the same philosophy she laid out in Connecticut. That outside criticism, particularly from non-traditional media, is noise. That independent creators, YouTubers, podcasters, and fans with platforms who ask hard questions are part of the problem she identified on that podium, rather than legitimate voices holding a public organization accountable. This is where it gets personal for every independent sports creator covering this franchise. If you do not carry a press badge from a legacy outlet, if your audience found you on YouTube or social media rather than through a cable news network, your scrutiny gets categorized differently. Your questions become trolling. Your coverage becomes the toxicity that needs to be cleaned up. And that philosophy, whether it is spoken out loud or simply embedded in how the organization operates, creates a wall between the Fever and the very audience that made them the most culturally significant franchise in women's sports. You cannot build a wall around yourself and then wonder why people are suspicious of what is happening on the other side. The irony that sits at the center of all of this is almost too perfect. White told the world she was going to clean up the noise around women's basketball. Then she took the job that generates more noise than any other, and through a series of communication failures, contradictory statements, and opaque decision-making, became one of the primary sources of the drama she said she wanted to eliminate. And while all of this chaos was swirling, something genuinely historic happened on the court that deserved to be the only story anyone was talking about. With Sophie Cunningham watching from the sideline in street clothes, Clark and Aliyah Boston decided to do something nobody in the history of women's professional basketball had ever done before. Clark finished the night with 32 points and 10 assists. Boston put up 34 points and 12 rebounds. Together, they became the first pair of teammates in WNBA history to both record 30-point double-doubles in the same game. Let that sit for a second. In the entire existence of this league, no two players on the same team had ever accomplished that in the same contest. Clark and Boston did it on a Thursday night in Indianapolis with their enforcer sitting out in half the internet arguing about an elbow injury. Clark's performance was ridiculous by any standard. Her 32 points came with the kind of shot-making that reminds you why she changed the entire trajectory of a professional sports league. This was her third career game with at least 30 points and 10 assists, which is now the most in WNBA history. She did not just play well, She played at a level that no one in this league has consistently reached before, and Boston matched her every step of the way. 34 points is not a typo. Aliyah Boston, the player who has quietly become one of the most complete forces in the league, was unstoppable. She was scoring inside, stepping out, and rebounding everything in her area code. The two of them combined for 66 points, and the Fever poured in a franchise record 114 points on the night. But because this is the Indiana Fever, nothing can just be clean and simple and celebratory. Indiana held a 5-point lead with under 20 seconds remaining. The game was supposed to be over. Then the Fever turned the ball over on an inbounds play. Note the irony there. An inbounds play, the same type of play that generated a week-long controversy after the Mystics game. This time the turnover gave Chicago life, and Skylar Diggins buried a deep three-pointer to tie the game and force overtime. The building went silent. The momentum shifted entirely. It felt like the kind of collapse that would define the rest of the season. Except it did not. Boston took over in overtime. Chicago went 1 for 8 from the field in the extra period. Clark added a couple of clutch free throws. Indiana pulled away and won 114-106. The Fever moved to 7-5 on the season, and in the narrow scoreboard sense, everything worked out. The Stars delivered. The win went in the column. Cunningham's absence did not cost them on the court, and you can already hear the organizational spin forming in real time. But the scoreboard was never the only thing being measured here. And that is the part this franchise keeps getting wrong. Here is the predictable response that is already making its way through the Fever's communication channels. The team won. Cunningham rested. Clark and Boston made history. Everything was managed correctly. You were all overreacting. That has been the playbook from this front office every single time their decisions get questioned and the scoreboard bails them out. And every single time they lean on that playbook, the gap between them and their fan base gets a little wider. Because the scoreboard is not the only thing being measured. Trust is being measured. Credibility is being measured. The relationship between this franchise and the audience that fills those seats, buys that merchandise, watches every game on every platform, and turns this team into a ratings juggernaut is being measured every single day. And right now, that meter is running dangerously low. The fans who came in because of Caitlin Clark are not casual observers. They are deeply, personally invested in this team. They watch every game, they follow every practice report, they track every injury update, they consume every single piece of content that gets created about this roster. They did not just show up for the novelty and leave. They stayed. They stayed because of Aliyah Boston's quiet brilliance. They stayed because of Kelsey Mitchell's toughness. They stayed because of Sophie Cunningham's fire and fearlessness. They became fans of the entire franchise, and they have earned the right to ask questions when things do not add up. Those fans are not trolls. They are the reason the WNBA was able to negotiate a massive new media rights deal. They are the reason every single one of Indiana's 44 games this season is being broadcast on national television, a franchise record. They are the reason arenas sell out and merchandise flies off the shelves and sponsors line up around the block. The Fever wanted this audience. They courted this audience. They benefited enormously from this audience. And now that audience is asking hard questions, and the organization's response has been to treat them like a problem that needs to be managed rather than a partner that deserves transparency. You wanted the big stage. Congratulations, you got it. And the big stage comes with big stage rules. Same rules that apply in the NFL, in the NBA, in every major professional sports league on the planet. When your communication does not add up, people notice. When your injury reports appear out of thin air, people ask questions. When your players contradict each other publicly about a game-winning play, people demand answers. That is not toxicity. That is accountability. And the sooner this organization learns the difference between the two, the sooner this cycle stops repeating itself. Because right now, the cycle is painfully predictable. An injury or a decision surfaces with minimal explanation. A communication gap opens up. Fans react with frustration and suspicion. The organization gets defensive. Media coverage intensifies. Accusations of trolling and toxicity fly. And then the whole thing resets until the next incident triggers the exact same sequence all over again. That is not sustainable. That is not how you build a championship culture. And it is certainly not how you honor the fan base that made everything you have possible. What happens next will tell us everything about whether this franchise is ready to grow up or determined to keep repeating the same mistakes. Sophie Cunningham is going to be fine. Let that be said clearly and definitively. The elbow is not a structural issue. Reports indicate she has already been upgraded to probable for the next game against the Connecticut Sun. This is a woman who tore her MCL last season, missed the rest of the year, fought her way back through rehab, and showed up on opening night ready to compete. She played in every single game this season before the Chicago contest. She is not fragile. She is not going anywhere. And when she steps back onto the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the crowd is going to welcome her back like a returning warrior. Because that is exactly what she has earned through her effort, her toughness, and her willingness to be the player who steps into the fire when everyone else steps back. But the larger issue here has never been about Sophie Cunningham's elbow. It has been about an organization that continues to create unnecessary chaos through avoidable communication failures. And that has to change. Not gradually, not eventually. Now, the Indiana Fever have a roster that should be competing for a championship. Caitlin Clark is in her prime and playing at a level that is rewriting the record books in real time. Aliyah Boston is evolving into one of the most dominant players in the league. Kelsey Mitchell is a proven scorer who has been in this system for years. The talent is there. The pieces are there. The fan base is there. The money, the media deal, the national spotlight, all of it is there. What is missing is institutional maturity. What is missing is a front office and a coaching staff that understands transparency is not a weakness. Telling people the truth early, clearly, and consistently is not giving ammunition to critics. It is the single most effective way to neutralize criticism before it spirals. If Sophie Cunningham's elbow had been mentioned on an injury report 3 days before the Chicago game with a brief, honest explanation, none of this controversy happens. If the Mystics' game-winning play had been addressed with a simple acknowledgement that the play broke down, and the players improvised brilliantly, it would have been a feel-good story instead of a credibility crisis. If the sideline interaction in Portland had been addressed directly and honestly in the post-game, it would have been a one-day story instead of a week-long firestorm that spawned fake firing reports. Every single one of these situations was made worse by the organization's instinct to control, spin, or minimize rather than simply communicate. Stephanie White is not a bad basketball coach. Her resume speaks for itself. Coach of the Year with the Sun, 3 straight semifinal appearances, decades of experience as a player and a coach. She knows the game at an elite level, but coaching this team requires more than basketball knowledge. It requires a level of public-facing transparency and communication sophistication that goes beyond anything she has dealt with before. Clark is not just a player. She is a cultural phenomenon, and the pressure cooker that surrounds her demands a different kind of leadership from everyone in the building. Until Stephanie White, Amber Cox, Kelly Crossan, and everyone else making decisions inside that organization understands that the audience they invited in deserves to be treated as full partners in this journey, rather than as children who need to be managed and kept at arm's length. This exact cycle will keep repeating. The Fever are too talented to be stuck in this loop forever. The only question now is whether they are smart enough to break out of it before it costs them something they cannot get back. So here is where we stand. Sophie Cunningham and a right elbow that sent the internet into a spiral. Stephanie White and a Connecticut press conference that follows her like a shadow she cannot outrun. 2 players telling 2 different stories about the same game-winning play. A sideline confrontation that sparked fake firing reports. And in the middle of all that noise, Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston quietly etching their names into the history books in a way that should have been the only headline. The Indiana Fever are not short on talent. They are not short on fans. They are not short on opportunity. They are short on trust. And trust is the one thing you cannot buy, cannot spin, and cannot win back with a single overtime victory. The clock is ticking in Indianapolis, and the whole world is watching.
Stay locked with my channel, Simply Explained, for further WNBA updates.